So, hello and welcome back to Christine, attempting to recap a really good book and hoping that I'm getting even a tenth of how good this book is across to you. We are attempting to recap The Phoenix Transformed by Mercedes Lackey and James Mallory, a wonderful series. And this is the final book in that series where we started off with two boys on an adventure, and now we're still with two boys on an adventure, but the adventure has grown much darker. In the last chapter, Bisochim and Tercel flew off to hopefully go to the Elven lands and actually recruit help so that we can trap the elemental spirit of darkness, Aniron, and maybe someday she can be destroyed, because Harrier and Tercel don't seem to think that they're going to be able to do it, because Tercel seems to have lost his dragon, which should have killed him if Enkeldar had actually died. But according to the Unicorn Kerta, Enkeldar's not dead. He's just nowhere that Tercel can sense him, and nowhere that Tercel can draw upon his power. So definitely weird. Put a pin in that. We will probably circle back to that much later. And as Bisochim and Tercel fly off towards the Elven lands, Harrier is going to attempt to convince the Isvani people that they need to leave the oasis that Bisochim had made, because for whatever reason, whether it's Bisochim just not maintaining the spells anymore or something in Aniron breaking free that broke the spells, all of the spells that maintain this oasis are gone, and the oasis is drying up, and this is not going to be able to keep these people alive, so they all need to leave. That's pretty much where we left it. Harrier was attempting to get all of the leaders of the Isvani to agree to leave the Lake of Fire, which is now a lake in reality. And they argued. Xanatar, who is the leader of the young warriors who sacked and killed all of the people in the Atreyu cities, argued with Harrier. People were arguing, people were fighting, and Harrier lays out everything to the Isvani leaders and says, whatever, I don't care. Stay here, die, don't care, I'm going home. And that is where the last chapter ended. So we are going to be jumping in and recapping chapter 7 of The Phoenix Transformed by Mercedes Lackey and James Mallory, and chapter 7 is titled Dark Deception. And chapter 7 is actually flipping perspectives. This is one of those chapters that flips back and forth between Tercel and Harrier a lot, which is good because they're in two totally different areas, and it's good to know what's going on with both of them. So we start off with Tercel, who is flying along on Saravase's back, and he's with Bisochim, and he realizes that despite the fact that when he was with Ankeldar, he felt perfectly safe, his fear of heights is back. Bisochim is kind of surprised by this because he does know that Tercel was bonded to a dragon, and it seems strange to him that anybody that's part of a dragon bond should be afraid of heights. And Tercel lets him know that, flying with somebody else is very different. And Bisochim seems to think that actually what it is that Tercel is afraid of him. He says, no, if I sought your life now, I would have killed you a while ago. They're talking, and then suddenly Saravase starts flying very erratically. Bisochim first starts yelling at Saravase. I know that a lot of their relationship is just hurt feelings and misunderstanding. Well, not misunderstandings. Bisochim fell to the dark, and Saravase is absolutely right in not talking to him, but at the same time, she still loves him. So watching them with each other in the last couple chapters is really hard because, oh, Bisochim's a jerk. But she's flying erratically. Tercel looks up and, quoting, he wasn't ready for what he saw. There was another rider in the sky. For an instant, Tercel felt a pang of relief. The elves already know what happened. They've sent help. Then Saravase went into another of her desperate escape maneuvers, and Tercel realized uneasily that the other creature in the sky wasn't a dragon. It was large and winged, and there the similarity ended. Instead of a dragon's long, graceful neck, its body simply seemed to stop, and a pair of enormous arms ending in cruel pincher-like claws grew out of its massive shoulders. 3 pairs of spindly legs dangled beneath its body, and instead of the tapering whip-like flanged tail of the dragon, it possessed a curved club-like tail with a wicked barb at the tip. This hideous thing resembled nothing so much as a giant bat-winged jarari. Poised on its back was a scarlet-robed figure. It was too distant for Tercel to make out any of the details about the rider beyond the color of the robes, but Bisochim recognized her. Now, a jarari, which nothing in this book is ever specifically said to correlate to animals we know, but from that description, it sounds like an iron is riding on a giant flying scorpion. That does seem to be what a jarari is meant to correlate to in our time. And that sounds horrifying to me. I don't know if I could handle giant flying scorpions. I'm not an arachnophobe. I appreciate spiders in their natural environment. I even appreciate spiders, like, they can live in my basement. They can whatever, just don't be above my head when I wake up. I've had that happen, and that's not something I enjoy, to look up when you wake up and see a spider. And scorpions are even creepier, in my opinion. It's something about, they just look alien. So a giant flying scorpion that can have somebody riding on it, that's nightmare fuel to me. But Bisochim definitely recognizes the figure. A Niren, he said, his voice filled with hate. If Tercel had been afraid before, he was terrified now. A Niren, the fire woman, the demon, the creature he had hoped to defeat by preventing her summons into the world, and now that she was here, and Ankeldar was gone, every half-formed plan he had ever made seemed so incredibly stupid. She won't be able to pass Palasha's veil, Tercel shouted to Bisochim. I hope, he thought. They were still somewhere over the Izvai. Glancing away from an iron for an instant, Tercel could see dune shadows and the gray rock of the desert below. Far, far below. Aniran starts launching spells at Saravase, and Tercel is so frustrated because this is what he was training for. This is what Ankeldar had taught him spells for how to fight a demon. And obviously, Bisochim has not been training for this. Bisochim is powerful. He's got Saravase's powers to call upon. Tercel tells him that he's got to do something because Tercel can't. And Bisochim does not know anything that could help. Tercel racks his mind trying to think of spells in the wild magic that he's heard about from Harrier that might be helpful against this flying demon that's attacking them. And he yells lightning, and lightning starts crackling all about them, but it's not Bisochim that's flinging the lightning, it's Aniran. Saravase's slewing around trying to dodge lightning bolts and a flying scorpion, and finally Bisochim starts flinging lightning back. It's a very one-sided battle. Aniran seems to have the advantage, and this entire time they keep getting closer to the ground. They haven't crashed yet, but, you know, it's getting closer. And finally, Aniran gets close enough that Tercel can see her. For a timeless moment, Tercel stared into Aniran's eyes. The world of his visions and the real world became one. Her hair streamed out behind her, not fire pale as he had dreamed it, but dark like banked coals with flashes of red. Her skin was the color of pale honey, and her teeth as white as a cat's, her eyes the bright gold of a bird's. As vividly real as she was, Aniran should not have had the power to terrify him the same way his visions had. But as he stared at her, all Tercel could think about was getting away, even if it meant leaping from Saravase's back. But before he could act on that impulse, Saravase did the only thing that she could to evade a head-on collision. She twisted herself in midair and rolled, so that for a few heartbeats she was flying upside down, and Aniran and her winged scorpion would pass above her. But Saravase wore no saddle to keep her riders with her. And as soon as she rolled, Bisochim and Tercel began slipping off her back. Saravase twisted again upright immediately to keep them from falling, but she was too close to her enemy, and the bat-winged creature pivoted in the air and grabbed her wing in its pinchers. She turned her head to strike at it, but she was too slow. Tercel heard a loud pop and a crackling, like the sounds a campfire makes with green wood. For a moment he wondered, dazed with terror, how he could be hearing those sounds right now. Then Saravase screamed, lurched sideways in the air, and began to fall. The bat-winged creature had released Saravase immediately, and it didn't attack her again. It didn't need to. She was still high above the desert floor. Tercel stared in Tercel stared in horror at the fluttering ruin of her wing. All that was left were trailing scraps of membrane. Most of the long ribs had broken or sheared off. Saravase keened in agony as she desperately beat her good wing. The remains of the other clicked and fluttered as she thrashed it reflexively, but it was useless. Tercel clutched at Bisochim, wondering if he had the courage to just jump. The horizon spun as Saravase fell, and Tercel glimpsed Aniran hovering above them, just waiting. The next thing that Tercel knows is he's still alive, and he's hot, and he hurts everywhere. He feels Bisochim kind of trying to touch his head, and as Bisochim tells him not to move. Bisochim also tells him that if they hadn't fallen into soft sand, they wouldn't be alive at all. And he tells Tercel, just lay still and let him heal him. Tercel protests that, and Bisochim ignores him and batters through all of the shields that Ankeldar helped him put in place and heals Tercel, which is kind of good, but also very bad if you remember wild magic and high magic don't really get along, and normally Tercel just feels kind of nauseous around wild magic, but this is a lot worse when you're being directly healed. Tercel screams and thrashes. He is definitely healed, but the wild magic makes him very sick. Bisochim is a little bit confused, and he's like, you shouldn't be injured anymore. Why are you screaming and acting like, like this is terrible? And Tercel attempts to explain high magic to Bisochim, who says there aren't any high mages anymore. Then Bisochim, after a little bit of discussion about the differences between high and wild magic, lets Tercel know what happened. And he said, when I recovered my senses, Aniran and the Balwarta, which is what he's calling the flying scorpion, were gone. I don't know why she didn't choose to kill us. Perhaps she thought us dead, but her folly is our fortune, for I will now heal Saravase and we will continue our mission. He gets up and Tercel can see Saravase in the sand. She hit a sand dune, which did save her life and also theirs because she hit soft sand. And he watches Bisochim as Bisochim goes over to heal Saravase, and he realizes that there's something very wrong. No, he shouted, just as Bisochim reached Saravase and placed his hand upon her shoulder. His shout mingled with hers. Bisochim recoiled in shock, as much from the sudden movement of Saravase's head as the sound of her voice. Tercel ran to him, staggering and stumbling through the sand. He grabbed Bisochim's arm. No, he told him, you can't. I will heal my bonded, said Bisochim. You can't, said Tercel. He knew that he didn't have the words to explain. He only knew that something would go very wrong if Bisochim did. You mustn't, beloved. The child speaks the truth. It was hard to say whether Tercel or Bisochim was more shocked at hearing her words. The scarlet dragon had raised her head from the sand to shout her warning. Saravase, said Bisochim, beloved, I must heal you so you can fly again, just as I did so long ago. Don't you remember? I remember, the dragon said, but it cannot be. She explains. The spirit of darkness has willed it. You can draw upon my magic as much as you choose, and no harm will come to you. But any spell cast upon me will open a window into your spirit that will make you an Iron's plaything. You must leave me as I am. And that is an Iron's trap. Evidently, she has placed a spell upon Saravase so that anybody who casts magic on her to heal her will basically just open up their mind so that an Iron can corrupt them, possess them, something along those lines. And that is where we leave those two and shift back to Harrier, who has left the tents after telling people he was going home. He isn't exactly sure how he can do it, but he does know where he can at least go and think. He goes out to where the orchards are, and he can see that they're already starting to wilt since the The magic spells that were maintaining everything are gone, but at least it's shady. And he sits down and is like, all right, I would love to go home. He doesn't even know if home is still there, but you know, he thinks about how far away Arameth is, and he just doesn't know what to do. He does think, quoting, it would be really convenient if Tercel showed up right about now. Harrier sighed bitterly, knowing how unlikely that was. Tercel had probably barely even arrived at the Elven city, let alone started explaining what he had come for, assuming he got there at all. Harrier didn't want to think about all the worst things that could happen, but he couldn't help it. Bisochim wasn't shadow-touched, but bad things happened all the time, even without demons or the dark around. Just look at Xanatar and everything that he had done. He does think about the fact that borrowing trouble isn't going to help. Besides, you know, Bisochim is maybe a little bit crazy, but Saravase's there and it's fine. It'll probably take them an hour or two to get to the elves and they'll be perfectly safe, but what if the elves refused to help when they got there? Harrier didn't really understand why the elves hadn't been willing to do more in the first place. Idalia and Germain had said it was because they were afraid of Tercel making the wrong choices, so they had told him nothing and given him nothing beyond the power to cast the spells of high magic. And Ankildar had been more to both Tercel and Harrier than a power source, but now he was gone. And Harrier wasn't completely certain that the elves wouldn't just help at all. He wasn't certain that the elves would not say that asking for the help of elven mages was the same as them interfering. But Harrier had spent just enough time in the elven lands to know that he would have to live as long as an elf to understand the way they thought. They might say no, or they might offer Tercel a form of help that Tercel wouldn't take. They might offer Tercel another dragon bond. Harrier shook his head in frustration. He couldn't bring himself to believe that Tercel would accept, no matter how desperate, and how could he when Ankildar wasn't dead? Kerta had seemed certain of that much, and Harrier had paid a high enough price for the information. A price he hadn't paid yet. Ever since this had started, Harrier had kept trying to get used to the idea that the world was a place he couldn't influence and couldn't control, and all that seemed to happen was that the more control he gave up, the more was taken away. He had gone from being Tercel's companion on their journey to his follower on their desperate quests, and now he wasn't even that. And along the way, he had given up the charge over his own life to the wild magic. All the Wonder Tales talked about wild mages having great power, as if that meant that the wild mages were people like high magistrates or elven queens, or even as Da, people who got to give orders and have things turn out the way they wanted them to. But being a wild mage wasn't anything like that at all. It didn't mean having more power as much as it meant having different power. And maybe, depending on what you had started out with, it meant less power. And as for control, well, as far as he could tell, you didn't have any of that. Not over what you were going to be doing tomorrow or where you were going to be. All goes as the wild magic wills, Harrier muttered in disgust. He closed his eyes against the brightness of the day. At least he still had control over that. So Harrier is laying in this orchard, ruminating over where he is and trying to figure out what to do next. And he realizes that he's about to have company. He knows this even with his with his eyes closed because of his, what he says, quoting so far useless special night mage gifts, he opens his eyes and sees that it's Xanatar. Xanatar was alone, but he was also armed. He hadn't been armed back at the tent, nobody had, but now he was wearing not only his Geshak, but his Awarden, two different swords and knives. He stopped about 10 feet away from Harrier, staring at him. "I am a blooded warrior, proven in battle," said Xanatar. "Go away," Harrier answered. "You have claimed for yourself the mantle of Night Mage, that which the wild magic bestowed upon Kellen the poor orphan boy in the darkest hour the world has yet known. If you are indeed that which you claim to be, you may prove it now by slaying me in fair battle. Do this, and all those who call me brother will follow you." Now, if we know anything about Harrier, we know that that is both the thing that he does want to do. He is really sick of Xanatar, and also the last thing that he wants to do. "Yeah," said Harrier. "No, I don't have to prove anything to you. I really don't like you. I don't like you a whole lot, actually, but I don't ever want to have to kill anyone ever again. Maybe killing people doesn't bother you." Harrier bit his lip. He would never forget the man he had killed the day that Xanatar's army had taken the city. It seemed horrible that he didn't know his name. Just as horrible as the fact that he couldn't clearly remember any of the others he had killed at all. Xanatar stared at him for a long moment. "Once I thought I would live out the compass of my years without knowing what it was to let another's life from their body by the strength of my own hand. And then the day came when Loranda showed me the body of the blue robe buried in the sand, and I believed all that Bisochim had told us, and I believed our great enemies had slain those who meant no man harm. And now you have come to tell us that there has been no enemy save Bisochim, that it was he who slew the other blue robes, he who has fed us on the meat of lies till we choked upon it. And you don't want to believe me, and you're too afraid that you do. Well, too bad," said Harrier unfeelingly. "Bisochim summoned a demon, and to get here, it tricked him, and it lied to him. And Bisochim tricked you and lied to you. But no matter how many lies you were told, some of the things you did were still your own choice. So if you think I'm going to forgive you or anybody, I'm not. But it doesn't matter as much as it should, because there's a demon loose." "Bisochim will slay the demon, won't he?" said Xanatar. "No," said Harrier. "He can't." He was tired and angry, and he didn't see why Xanatar shouldn't know the truth, especially now that he seemed willing to believe it. Bisochim is a dragon-bound wild mage. He's probably the most powerful mage I've seen, and as a matter of fact, Xanatar, I know you won't believe this, but I've met Jermaine Dragon Rider. Bisochim doesn't have enough magic, or not the right kind of magic, to kill an Iron. Tercel is hoping that the elven mages will be able to find and imprison an Iron until the right kind of mages that can kill her could be born and trained, but if they can't, well, we're all gonna die. And so we must go back to the Izvai, because this place is cursed, and because there are no armies of the false balance seeking us, said Xanatar. It seems that it's finally penetrating through Xanatar's head that A, Harrier is not actually a demon, and B, that he's massively messed up. It gave Harrier a mean-spirited satisfaction to see the fear and realization on Xanatar's face. He sighed. Aniron wasn't Xanatar's fault, no matter what else was. The reason you have to go back to the Isvai is because this place is drying up. And because if Aniron comes back, you don't have any place to run to. And because when First Magistrate Von L's army gets to the Mandarian, and believe me, one is coming, we had all better just hope that Aniron isn't at the lead of it. He could see from the look of stunned realization that this idea hadn't even occurred to him. Harrier had been thinking of nothing else from the moment he realized that Aniron was actually here. And if she is leading it, said Xanatar. The man looked truly frightened now. Well, at least if he thought that the wrong people were demons, at least he believed in demons being loose. Well, if she is leading the armies from the city, I guess you should give thanks to the wild magic that you learned to fight. Xanatar then looks at Harrier and says, Wild mage, if it is as you say, we can't do this alone. Don't forsake the Isvani people. We need the counsel of the wild magic now. I'm begging you. If my death... Oh, for the eternal light's sake, Xanatar. Haven't enough people died? Harrier snarled and thrust himself to his feet. He glared down at Xanatar. Is that all you can think of to do? Forever? Just kill and kill? It's stupid. Lead us, said Xanatar, as great Kellen led the armies of old. Harrier flexed his hands. I'm not Kellen, he said. And your people are not an army, but I'll ride with you back to the Isvai. Just stop killing people. And so Harrier, instead of getting a chance to somehow figure out how to go home, has now decided to, fine, lead the Isvani people out back to at least the main part of the desert. He isn't sure how to do it, and he isn't sure anybody other than Xanatar is going to listen, but he lays there for a little while after Xanatar leaves, and he starts hearing noise. He knows it's not fighting. It doesn't sound like fighting noise. It's just noisy noise. And so he walks back to where the Isvani people are all packing everything up and telling him that they'll start leaving tonight. Xanatar has told them that Harrier is going to lead them out. And he's like, okay, sure. This is like 30 or 40,000 people, and I am now leading them. Harrier hadn't thought that anybody could be ready to go in less than a day, but just as the Isvani woman had said, the Kadaistar, the Barantar, and the Kazaman tribes were ready to leave by nightfall. Harrier, Shariah, and Sinaran were going to go with them. Harrier had been surprised to discover that Shariah now not only had a tent, but everything that went along with it, since he had had it drummed into his head over and over that there was no charity amongst the Isvani. But Shariah could choose to accept what Liafa wanted to give her in Ganemia's name, and no matter what she thought of her grandmother, Shariah was pragmatic enough to know that they needed supplies to cross the desert. Her mother's long unpaid bride price was now a tent and supplies and a couple extra shotars. So off they're going to go. Now, they're being very smart about this. Harrier knows that he is not Bisochim, and he does not have the power to just draw up water from the earth, so they're going to have to go in groups, kind of the way the young hunters did when they were out searching for the Nalzindar. And so they're going to leave a little bit at a time, a little bit bigger than the 15 or 20 people at a time that left when they were hunting the Nalzindar, but Shariah assures Harrier that everybody will help him if he needs to call water or anything, but they're going to stagger their arrivals at these wells that Bisachim has made. Shariah also lets him know that once they reach Abi Abadashar, Sanaran and her will go and they'll bring all of the Nalzindar so that we can all return to the Izvai together. And so they head off. And Harrier thinks about everything that's coming. You know, he's like, it's what, 20 days away from the Isvani desert, 3 sun nights. He's like, Bisachim will be back by then. Tercel's coming back with a bunch of elven mages. He doesn't have to figure out how to keep all these people alive. He doesn't have to figure out anything. It's fine. He's just got to at least get to the first well with this first bunch of people, and everything will be fine. He keeps telling himself that. Unfortunately, we know that Tercel is not doing too good, and that's when we shift back to Tercel, Bisachim, and Saravase. And Tercel is kind of thinking about, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? He looks over at Saravase. She couldn't fly now. And Bisachim didn't dare heal her. Even if they could somehow find somebody else that has the power, Tercel didn't think that that person could heal her either. Saravase had said that she was a trap for Bisachim, but Tercel didn't think an Iron would have done something that specific. And if he was right, anyone that cast a spell on Saravase would open a channel between them and an Iron, allowing her to taint and overshadow them. He walks over and he can hear Bisachim and Saravase speaking together, and he's done. He is done with this, and he doesn't know what to do. Bisachim comes over and talks to Tercel a little bit, and Saravase is now speaking. He literally does not know what to do. Saravase lets them know that anybody that heals her is opening up a channel to Aniran's control. And Tercel wonders how long it's going to be before Bisachim caves. He knows that she's in extreme pain, and Bisachim might have been able to hold out against healing her in the heat of the moment, in shock over hearing her speak again after so long, but how long is he going to be able to hold out? And that's kind of where they are, Bisachim summons up some water, which, because Tercel was like, we're all gonna die, you might as well just heal her, and fine, give us up to the dark. Tercel, I would say he's at his almost lowest point now. Saravase says, no, he's not going to do it. And once Aniran realizes that Bisachim is not going to heal me, she's going to return and kill us. Tercel looks up because he's realized something else. No, said Tercel. He felt sick and unhappy as he worked it out, but it was logical, and as much as he hated thinking about it, he knew he was right. She doesn't want Bisachim to die. She wants him to surrender. Think about it. She's a spirit of darkness. What does she want? To kill everyone, said Saravase, and eat them. To destroy the light, said Bisochim. Maybe, said Tercel. But I had visions of Nyren for an entire year, and she always wanted you to go to her. If she just wanted to kill you, she could have done that already. There's something else she wants. There was a moment of silence. There is, said Bisochim. She wants to make more of her kind. So they're starting to figure out that, exactly what Bisochim wants. Or not Bisochim, exactly what Anirin wants. That she wants a wild mage or a mage. She wants someone to help breed up a new race of demons, made from men the way that the Undarkened were once made from elves. This is kind of horrifying, and Tercel also figures out that it doesn't just have to be Bisochim. Any wild mage that she can taint will probably do. And he realizes that maybe the wild magic drawing Bisochim to kill all the wild mages in the desert was a good thing. As horrifying as that seems to him, that, there's only 3 wild mages that she could possibly taint, and that's him, Harrier, and Bisochim. So Bisochim's like, she could taint you. You're not a wild mage, but you have magic. And Tercel says she can't bring Ankildar back, and that's all I want. And with that realization, we shift back over to Harrier, who is trying to get all of the people going. They're traveling. Harrier is kind of miserable. He's trying to list the things in his life that make him happy, and about all that that's coming up to is that they're not dead yet, and they've been able to get water because they've made it to the first well. But that's about all he can think of that's making him happy right now, because Xanatar has been following him along and telling everyone that once they get back to the Izvai, they're all going to go demon hunting. Harrier isn't sure why Xanatar is shadowing him around like he's some sort of a hero all of a sudden when he was trying to kill him. But Shariah has a little bit of insight into that. A man will place his faith in a thing and have that faith broken, said Shariah. Yet he will not then see that faith is a precious thing he must hold close. Instead, he will quickly bestow his faith in another. Basically, she's saying that Xanatar, now that he's disillusioned with Bisochim, he is placing all of his faith in Harrier. Harrier is not exactly sure that he likes this idea. But they are traveling through the Barileth, the hottest part of the desert, and they're making it so far. And Harrier's like, all right, we're almost to Abiabadashar. That is good. And he's talking with Shariah about how, she can go and get the Nalzindar when disaster strikes. Harrier hears the flock guard dogs start to bark. He can hear the goats and sheep start shrieking. He knows that this is absolutely terrible. He conjures up some cold fire and he sees goblins. It definitely was too easy for them, obviously. They were making good time. They were almost back to Abiabadashar, and goblins are attacking. The Izvai people have never seen goblins. Harrier's the only one that knows how to fight them, and he's the only one that can fight them with fire. The Isvani people are lucky in the fact that it is goblins that attack them, because everywhere that the goblins stop to feed, because goblins are much more interested in food than anything else, Harrier can set them on fire. He starts shouting to the people not to go and attack them directly because they spit poison, and to let him set them on fire after they stop to eat. It seems to be working. Unfortunately, the goblins, there's only a small pack of them, but they do manage to pretty much eat every goat, shotar, and sheep around. And Harrier thinks that he's gotten most of them, but no, he hasn't. Um, they attack, the goblins attack the actual Isvani people who he is leading, and it's not good. But he does manage to hold them off, kill all the goblins, but at what cost? You know, he gathers the people together after the battle, and he's like, I know this is bad. I know none of us were expecting it, but I can at least share what attacked us last night. They argue about the fact that all of their food, the goats and the sheep, are gone. And the chapter pretty much ends with Harrier realizing that not only is Tercel not back yet, but that Aniran is not going to be leaving them in peace to get back to the Isbai. That no, since the dark is back, they're probably going to be attacked a lot, and that they should definitely set up some sort of a relay system, because if you remember, they left the Lake of Fire in small groups, and Harrier isn't sure that they're even ever going to make it to Abi Abadashar, much less make it out of the Baraleth, because Aniran, who we know went and attacked Tercel and Bisochim, now seems to have turned her attention back towards the Isvani people themselves and Harrier. So that is where the chapter ends, and it's interesting to me because this war, in contrast to the one in the Obsidian trilogy, is much more a war of attrition. I mean, there aren't huge groups of demons. There seems to only be an Iron, and whatever she can create to throw at Harrier, Tercel, and Bisochim, who we now know all she wants, all the Fire Crown has dealt with her for, is she just needs a mage to unite with her and make an entire new race of demons. And everything that she is doing seems to be towards making one of our three mages capitulate. And yeah, it's just going to become a giant war of attrition. Also, these chapters just keep getting longer and longer, so I'm not sure that we're going to have any chapter recaps that are going to be a 2-chapter night, because I just realized it took me an hour almost to recap this chapter. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I hope that made sense, and I hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.